The rain poured heavily as Emma hurried down the sidewalk, her thin jacket doing little to shield her from the cold. She tightened her grip on her bag, her mind racing about how she'd make rent this month. Just as she turned the corner, a sharp scream cut through the storm. A little girl, no older than 6, had slipped near the edge of a flooded drain, her tiny hands flailing as the rushing water pulled her closer. Without thinking, Emma sprinted forward, her heart pounding as she lunged for the child. With a desperate grab, Emma caught the girl's wrist just in time, yanking her back onto the sidewalk. The child trembled, her wide eyes filled with tears as she clung to Emma's soaked clothes. "It's okay, sweetheart," Emma whispered, brushing wet hair from the girl's face. "You're safe now." Before she could ask where the girl's parents were, a deep, frantic voice called out from behind them. "Sophia." Emma turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man running toward them, his expensive coat drenched. His face was pale with fear as he dropped to his knees, pulling the little girl into his arms. "Daddy!" Sophia sobbed, burying her face in his chest. The man's eyes flickered to Emma, gratitude and something else, something intense, flashing in his gaze. "You saved her," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Emma simply nodded, unaware that this single act of bravery was about to change her life forever. Emma expected the man to leave after thanking her, but instead, he stood still, holding Sophia close. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said, extending a hand. Emma hesitated before shaking it, her fingers icy against his warm grip. "Emma," she replied softly. Daniel studied her, her worn-out shoes, her soaked clothes, the exhaustion in her eyes. "You're freezing," he murmured. Before she could protest, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "I can't," Emma started, but Daniel shook his head. "Please. You saved my daughter. The least I can do is make sure you don't catch pneumonia." Sophia peeked out from her father's arms, her big eyes curious. "Are you a superhero?" she asked Emma. Emma laughed, the sound surprising even her. "No, sweetie. Just in the right place at the right time." Daniel's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. "Let me take you home," he said suddenly. "It's the least I can do." Emma wanted to refuse. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, but the cold was seeping into her bones. Reluctantly, she nodded. As they walked toward his sleek car, she had no idea that this was just the beginning. Daniel wasn't just a grateful father, he was a billionaire with the power to change her life. And he had every intention of doing just that. The car ride was silent, except for Sophia's occasional chatter. Emma stared out the window, watching the city blur past. As they entered an upscale neighborhood she'd only ever seen in magazines, mansions lined the streets, their gates imposing, Emma's breath caught. "This is your house?" she asked, unable to hide her awe. Daniel smirked. "One of them." He helped Sophia out before turning back to Emma. "Come inside. Warm up. Have something to eat." Emma hesitated. She didn't belong in a place like this. But before she could decline, Sophia grabbed her hand. "Please," the little girl begged, her eyes pleading. Emma's resistance crumbled. "Okay," she whispered, allowing herself to be led inside. The foyer alone was larger than her entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. A housekeeper appeared instantly, taking Emma's wet jacket. "Welcome, miss," she said kindly. Emma swallowed hard, suddenly self-conscious of her damp, second-hand clothes. Daniel noticed her discomfort and leaned in. "Relax," he murmured. "You're my guest." His words sent an unexpected warmth through her. Little did she know, this was only the first of many surprises waiting for her in Daniel Carter's world. Emma's feet sank into the plush carpet as Daniel led her into the living room. A roaring fire crackled in the marble fireplace, and the warmth seeped into her chill bones. Sophia tugged her toward the sofa, bouncing excitedly. "Daddy, can Emma stay for dinner?" she asked, her tiny hands clasped together. Daniel's eyes flickered to Emma, a question in them. Emma shifted uncomfortably. I really shouldn't intrude," she stammered. But Daniel shook his head. "You're not intruding. After what you did, the least we can do is feed you." Before she could protest again, a chef appeared in the doorway. "Dinner is ready, sir." Emma's stomach growled traitorously, and Daniel smirked. "See? Even your stomach agrees." The dining room was like something out of a movie, candlelight flickering over polished silver, delicate china, and food that looked too beautiful to eat. Emma hesitated before picking up her fork, painfully aware of how out of place she was. But as the first bite of roasted duck touched her lips, she nearly moaned in delight. Daniel watched her with an amused expression. "Good?" he asked. Emma nodded, embarrassed. "It's incredible." Sophia giggled. "Daddy's chef is magic." Daniel's smile softened as he looked at his daughter. But when his gaze returned to Emma, there was something deeper there, something curious, almost intrigued. Emma didn't realize it yet, but she had just stepped into a world where nothing would ever be the same again. After dinner, Daniel insisted on driving Emma home. As they pulled up to her tiny apartment building, his brow furrowed. "You live here?" he asked, unable to hide the concern in his voice. Emma stiffened. "It's not much, but it's home." Daniel studied the crumbling brickwork, the flickering hallway light. Then, without warning, he said, "I want to hire you." Emma blinked. "What?" Daniel turned to face her fully. "Sophia adores you. And after today, I don't trust just anyone with her safety. I need a personal assistant, someone to help with her, take her to school, be there when I can't." Emma's heart raced. "You barely know me." Daniel's lips quirked. "I know you risked your life for a child you'd never met. That's enough for me." The salary he named next made her breath catch. It was more than she'd ever dreamed of. But pride warred with desperation inside her. I don't know," she whispered. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low. "Emma, let me do this for you. You saved my daughter. Let me save you too." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emma swallowed hard, then slowly she nodded. The next morning, a sleek black car arrived to take Emma to the Carter estate. Her stomach twisted with nerves as she stepped inside, her small suitcase holding everything she owned. Daniel greeted her at the door, looking unfairly handsome in a crisp white shirt. "Ready for your first day?" he asked. Sophia came barreling down the hallway, launching herself at Emma. "You're really staying?" she squealed. Emma laughed, hugging her back. "For a little while?" "Yes." Daniel's expression darkened slightly at her words, but he said nothing. Instead, he led her on a tour of the house, her new home. Her room was bigger than her old apartment, with a canopied bed and a balcony overlooking the gardens. Emma spun in a slow circle, overwhelmed. "This is too much," she breathed. Daniel crossed his arms, leaning against the door frame. "Get used to it," he said softly. Then, before she could respond, he added, "Sophia has ballet at 3. You'll take her." And just like that, Emma's new life began. Emma nervously adjusted Sophia's tiny ballet shoes, her fingers fumbling with the delicate ribbons. "Am I doing this right?" she whispered. Sophia giggled. "No, silly, like this." The little girl demonstrated her movements, surprisingly precise for a 6-year-old. Emma smiled, but her stomach twisted when she noticed the other mothers watching her, their designer clothes and judgmental stares making her feel like an imposter. One woman in particular, with sharp cheekbones and a cold smile, approached. You must be the new nanny, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Sophia beat her to it. Emma's not a nanny. She's my hero. The woman's eyebrows shot up, and Emma's cheeks burned. Just then the studio door opened and Daniel strode in, his commanding presence silencing the room. He knelt beside Sophia, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Ready for class, princess? Then his eyes flicked to Emma, softening. Everything okay? Emma nodded, but the way his fingers briefly brushed her sent an electric spark up her arm. The sharp-eyed woman huffed and walked away, but Emma barely noticed. All she could think about was the way Daniel was looking at her, like she belonged there. Emma couldn't sleep. The mansion was too quiet, too grand. She tiptoed to the kitchen for water, jumping when she found Daniel sitting at the island, a half-empty whiskey glass in hand. Can't sleep either? He asked, his voice rough. Emma shook her head, suddenly hyper-aware of her thin pajamas. He poured her a glass without asking, sliding it across the marble counter. Sophia hasn't stopped talking about you, he admitted. She thinks you hung the moon. Emma laughed softly. She's easy to love. Daniel's gaze darkened. Not everyone thinks so. The pain in his voice made her chest ache. Before she could stop herself, she reached out, covering his hand with hers. The contact sent a jolt through them both. Daniel turned his palm up, intertwining their fingers. Emma, I. A sudden crash from upstairs cut him off. Sophia's terrified scream echoed through the house. They both bolted toward the sound, their moment forgotten. But as Emma raced up the stairs behind Daniel, one thought consumed her: something's not right in this perfect house. Sophia was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. The bad lady was in my closet, she sobbed. Emma gathered her into her arms while Daniel searched the room, his jaw clenched. No one's here, sweetheart, he murmured, but his eyes met Emma's over Sophia's head. We need to talk. Later, in his study, Daniel poured 2 stiff drinks. Her mother used to say the same thing, he admitted, right before she left. Emma's breath caught. You mean? Daniel nodded grimly. Postpartum psychosis. She refused help. One night she just disappeared. The raw pain in his voice shattered Emma's heart. She moved closer without thinking, her hand on his arm. I'm so sorry. Daniel's breath hitched. Then, in a voice so low she barely heard it. I can't lose Sophia too. Emma's resolve hardened. You won't, she promised. Not while I'm here. The way he looked at her then, like she was the answer to a prayer he'd never dared speak, changed everything between them. Emma was helping Sophia with her homework when Daniel walked in, holding an embossed envelope. The Whitmore Gala is next week, he said, his voice casual. I'd like you to come with us. Emma nearly dropped the pencil. Me? To a high society event? Sophia clapped her hands. You'll look so pretty, Emma. Daniel's gaze lingered on her face. Say yes, he murmured. Her stomach fluttered. This wasn't part of her job description, but the hopeful look in his eyes made resistance impossible. Okay, she whispered. 3 days before the gala, Daniel sent a team to Emma's room, stylists, makeup artists, and a woman carrying a velvet box. Inside lay a sapphire gown that made Emma gasp. This must be a mistake, she breathed. The head stylist smiled. Mr. Carter picked it himself. Said it would match your eyes. As they transformed her, Emma barely recognized herself in the mirror. But when Daniel saw her that night, his stunned silence spoke volumes. At the gala, Emma clung to Daniel's arm, overwhelmed by the glittering crowd. Relax, he whispered, his breath warm on her ear. They're just people. When the orchestra began a waltz, he surprised her by leading her onto the floor. I don't know how to. I'll teach you, he interrupted, pulling her close. As they moved together, Emma forgot about the watching crowd. There was only Daniel's strong arms, his intoxicating scent, and the way his thumb traced circles on her back. A beautiful woman in red suddenly cut in. Daniel, darling, you've been neglecting me. Emma stepped back, but Daniel tightened his grip. Miranda, Emma saved Sophia's life. Miranda's smile turned icy. How quaint. As she sauntered away, Daniel pulled Emma closer. Don't mind her. But the damage was done. Emma suddenly felt like an imposter in her beautiful dress, overwhelmed. Emma fled to the terrace. The cold air stung her cheeks. What was she doing here? Daniel found her minutes later. Without a word, he draped his jacket over her shoulders. Let's go home, he said simply. In the car, Sophia asleep between them, Emma finally asked. Why did you invite me tonight? Daniel stared at the passing lights. Because I wanted the world to see what I see. Back at the estate, Daniel walked Emma to her door. They lingered, the air between them charged. Emma's heart pounded as he leaned in, but just as their lips nearly touched. Daddy? Sophia's sleepy voice called out. Daniel pulled back, regret flashing in his eyes. Good night, Emma, he whispered before disappearing down the hall. Emma touched her lips, wondering what might have been. The morning after the gala, the air between Emma and Daniel was thick with unspoken words. Every glance held weight, every accidental brush of fingers sent sparks racing through Emma's veins. She found herself lingering in doorways, stealing glances when she thought he wasn't looking, only to catch him doing the same. At breakfast, Sophia chattered excitedly about the gala, oblivious to the tension. Emma, you looked like a princess, she declared, syrup dripping from her pancake onto the table. Daniel reached for a napkin at the same time as Emma, their hands colliding. The contact lasted only a second, but it was enough to make Emma's breath hitch. Daniel's fingers flexed, as if resisting the urge to intertwine with hers. He cleared his throat, pulling away. I have meetings all day, he said abruptly, standing up. But as he passed Emma, his hand briefly, almost unconsciously, brushed the small of her back. The touch was fleeting, but it burned through the thin fabric of her blouse. Emma stared after him, her heart pounding. This can't happen, she told herself. He's your employer. Sophia's father. A billionaire. You're just Emma. Sophia tugged her sleeve. Can we bake cookies today? Emma forced a smile, pushing her thoughts aside. Of course, sweetheart. But as she measured flour and sugar, her mind kept drifting back to Daniel's lingering touch, the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her. That night a violent storm rolled in, rattling the windows with thunder. Emma was reading in her room when a timid knock sounded at her door. Sophia stood there, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly. Can I sleep with you? She whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Emma didn't hesitate, pulling back the covers. Of course, sweetie. They had just settled in when another knock came. Daniel stood in the doorway, his hair slightly damp from the rain, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. Sophia, his voice was rough with concern. When he saw her curled up next to Emma, his shoulders relaxed. I was worried when I didn't find her in her room. Emma smiled softly. She's safe here. Daniel hesitated, then stepped inside. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air charged. Sophia yawned, snuggling deeper into the blankets. Daddy, stay too, she mumbled sleepily. Emma's pulse spiked. Daniel's gaze flicked to her, questioning. She gave a tiny nod, and he slowly sat on the edge of the bed. The storm raged outside, but inside there was only warmth, Sophia's steady breathing, the scent of Daniel's cologne, and the unspoken electricity between them. When Sophia finally drifted off, Daniel didn't move. His hand rested inches from Emma's on the blanket. She could feel the heat radiating from him. "Emma," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. She turned her head, finding his eyes in the dim light. The intensity there stole her breath. They were so close she could count his lashes, see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. The space between them crackled with tension. Emma's lips parted slightly, her body leaning in without conscious thought. Daniel's hand twitched, his fingers grazing hers. "We shouldn't," he whispered, but he didn't pull away. Emma's heart hammered. "I know," she breathed. For a heartbeat neither moved. Then, with a ragged exhale, Daniel stood. "Good night, Emma," he said, his voice strained. As the door closed behind him, Emma pressed her fingers to her lips, her skin still tingling where he'd almost touched her. The next morning Daniel was gone before dawn. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Business trip. Back in 3 days." Emma traced the sharp strokes of his handwriting, her chest tight. Sophia pouted over her cereal. "Daddy didn't say goodbye." Emma forced a smile. "He'll be back soon." But the words felt hollow. She knew why he'd left so abruptly, the same reason she'd lain awake all night replaying those charged moments. The house felt emptier without him. Emma threw herself into activities with Sophia, park visits, baking marathons, movie nights, but her thoughts kept drifting to Daniel. Had she imagined the connection between them? On the third night, as she tucked Sophia into bed, the little girl whispered, "Do you love my daddy?" Emma froze. "What?" Sophia giggled. "You look at him like the princesses look at their princes in my storybooks." Emma's face burned. Before she could respond, the front door opened downstairs. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Daniel was home. Emma hovered in the hallway as Daniel greeted Sophia, his deep voice sending shivers down her spine. When he stepped out of Sophia's room, their eyes met. 3 days apart had done nothing to dim the tension. If anything, it had intensified. Daniel looked tired, his stubble darker, his shirt wrinkled from travel. But his gaze was as intense as ever. "Emma," he said her name, a rough caress. She swallowed hard. "Welcome back." They stood there, the air between them thick with everything unsaid. Then Daniel took a step forward, and the doorbell rang. The doorbell shattered the moment. Daniel's jaw tightened as he turned away, leaving Emma standing breathless in the hallway. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding as she heard Miranda's shrill voice echo through the foyer. "Darling, I just had to see you." Emma retreated to the kitchen, gripping the counter. Of course Miranda would show up now. The woman had a sixth sense for ruining moments. Through the half-open door she heard Daniel's terse replies and Miranda's false laughter. Then footsteps. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression stormy. "She's leaving." Emma nodded, busying herself with the dishes. "You don't have to explain." A wet plate slipped from her fingers, but Daniel caught it, and her hand, in one swift motion. Water dripped between their joined fingers as he stepped closer. "Yes, I do." His thumb traced her knuckles. "There's nothing between Miranda and me. There's only." Sophia's voice carried down the hall. "Emma, I can't find Mr. Fluffkins." Daniel exhaled, his forehead briefly touching hers. "Later," he promised. Later came under the stars. Emma sat on the terrace, wrapped in a shawl, when Daniel appeared with 2 glasses of wine. "Sophia's asleep," he said, handing her one. They sat in silence, shoulders nearly touching, until Daniel spoke. "I left because I was scared." Emma turned to him. "Of what?" "Of this," he gestured between them, "of wanting someone so much it terrifies me." The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. She stared into her wine. I'm just a girl from the wrong side of town, Daniel. You're. He took the glass from her hand and set it aside. Look at me. When she did, his eyes burned with intensity. You're the bravest, kindest person I've ever met. You saved my daughter. You saved me. His hand cradled her cheek. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Emma leaned into his touch. You're not. The first brush of his lips was tentative, a question. When Emma answered by tangling her fingers in his hair, Daniel groaned, pulling her flush against him. The shawl slipped, forgotten to the ground, as he backed her against the terrace railing, his hands mapping her waist through the thin fabric of her dress. Emma gasped as his mouth trailed to her neck. Daniel, we can't. Sophia is asleep, he murmured against her skin. And my staff is discreet. His teeth grazed her collarbone, and she arched into him. Later, they'd talk about what this meant. Later, they'd worry about the world outside. But tonight, under a sky full of stars, there was only this, the way his heartbeat thundered against hers, the way her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. Morning brought reality. Emma woke tangled in Daniel's sheets, his arm heavy across her waist. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the stark differences between them, his polished dresser, her thrift store bracelet on the nightstand. Daniel stirred, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. Stay, he murmured. Emma turned to face him. As what? Your nanny. Your secret? He cupped her face. As the woman I love. The words hung between them. Emma's heart soared. But then Sophia's laughter floated down the hall. She pulled away. It's not just us, Daniel. She's already lost one mother figure. Daniel's eyes darkened with understanding. So we do it right. Together. 1 year later, Emma stood in the same garden where Daniel had first kissed her, now draped in white flowers. Sophia, in a lavender dress, proudly scattered petals ahead of her. Daniel waited at the altar, his eyes suspiciously bright. When Emma reached him, he whispered. Took you long enough. She laughed through her tears. Worth the wait. As they exchanged vows, Sophia squeezed between them, insisting on holding both their hands. The officiant chuckled. I now pronounce you a family. Later, under a shower of rice, Daniel dipped Emma backward in a kiss that left no doubt, this was no fairy tale. It was better. Because it was real. Did this billionaire single dad and the brave girl who stole his heart make you swoon sparkling heart? If you love their story, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe for more addictive romances, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a happily ever after.